Every action is followed by a consequence. Even the smallest and most insignificant action can lead to big consequences. This happened to me when I decided to help one person. I was quite kind and gentle, and I couldn't understand how my wife could cheat on me like that, right behind my back. My wife, Juanita, sat across the breakfast table from me as she had for the past 24 years of our marriage. It was a Thursday morning in late September, and the leaves in our backyard had started turning shades of yellow and tan. She was enjoying the view through the window of our breakfast nook while I read the morning paper. This had been our familiar routine in our empty nest for the past 2 years since our youngest daughter got married and moved out. Sometimes we discussed interesting news over breakfast, so when I turned the page and saw an article about a man found unconscious in a local cheap hotel, it caught my attention. Reading it, I recognized a familiar name. I read all the details with great interest, wondering if this could be the person I was thinking about. It seemed impossible. However, he was my wife's former colleague, so I needed to ask her if it could be him. According to this article, a man was found unconscious in a hotel room last night. His name was Darren Scott. Didn't you used to work with a Darren Scott, dear? Juanita made a noise as she sharply inhaled. Yes, a few years ago, but it might not be the same person, she said, trying to remain calm. The article says he was 34 and lived on the other side of town on Drury Lane with his wife and 3 children. Is that like him? Yes, it is, she replied, growing increasingly nervous. Does it say how he died? Yes, it mentions that he was found in room 32 of the Seaside Motel. You know, in a shady place that rents by the hour. The police suspect that a jealous husband may be involved in this, but they do not exclude other possibilities. Juanita covered her mouth with her hand and ran out of the kitchen into the bathroom. I grinned with satisfaction, knowing that Darren got what he deserved, and now Juanita was experiencing the shock and horror that comes when you find out that an ex-lover is a little damaged, perhaps by a jealous husband. My mind wandered back over our life together. We met just after college. I was hanging out with some friends at a bar, and she was there with some of hers. Juanita wasn't the prettiest one of the group, but certainly not the least attractive either. Gradually, my friends paired up with her group, and Juanita and I ended up chatting. One thing led to another, and 17 months later, we were married. We had a typical marriage with its ups and downs. We had a son, Brian, a year after we married, and a daughter, Amber, 2 years later. Both are now married. One lives an hour away, and the other 3 hours in the opposite direction. We lived our lives attending baseball games, basketball games, piano lessons, and other after-school activities. Neither of the kids were skilled enough to earn scholarships, so we are still paying off their student loans and will be for the next 7 years, keeping us on a tight budget. Neither Juanita nor I had jobs that required much travel or overtime, so we always knew where the other was, usually at home with the kids, doing things as a family. Now I'm Jack, 47, and Juanita is 46, and we're both in decent shape. She says I look better now than when we first met. I think the same about her, as the few extra pounds have enhanced her curves in all the right places. Just a week ago on Wednesday, I was rummaging through the junk drawer in my wife's dresser, looking for the sewing kit to fix a seam in my lucky bowling shirt, when I came across a red leather-bound book with the words Dear Diary on the front. I couldn't believe Juanita still kept her old diary from when she was young. I wondered if it included the time when we met and what she had to say about me. I cautioned myself that it might not be very flattering, as I was more infatuated with her than she was with me at first. I was taken aback when I saw the date on the top of the first page, March 15, 2011, just 2.5 years ago. My curiosity piqued. I started reading about how a younger English colleague of hers, Darren Scott, had begun flirting with her frequently. She was worried he might be trying to seduce her, but wrote that it will never happen. She noted that, as a woman in her mid-40s, it made her feel youthful and attractive again, and she hadn't realized how much she missed that kind of excitement in her life. She explained that the purpose of the diary was that she was bursting to tell someone about this, but she couldn't confide in anyone because several of her friends had boasted about similar flirtations to her. And she always chastised them harshly for even considering flirting back, knowing how easily such situations could spiral out of control and lead to a messy divorce. Naturally, she couldn't discuss this with her husband, so she turned to her diary. She vowed to herself to keep it light and never let things go too far. Over the next few weeks, she lamented that her children no longer needed her, and it would only get worse after Amber got married and moved away. She also remarked that I was as dull as staring at a picture of an albino cow in a blizzard. She noted that I had recently joined a Wednesday night bowling league and she barely noticed when I wasn't there. She complained that if this was all she had to look forward to in life, she would go crazy. I looked up from my book and rhetorically asked aloud, why didn't she say something to me? I had no idea it was this bad for her. I'll have to think of something to spice things up a bit. Then I went back to reading, and my mood shifted from sympathetic and sad to angry and hurt. She began to rationalize how having a one-time fling with Darren would add a little spice to her life. She added that I could benefit from it as well. She had other reasons, all of which were nonsense, why she should do it, but just once. Finally, she decided that if she was very careful and discreet, she could commit this dastardly deed for our benefit without getting caught. They planned and agreed to meet at the Seaside Motel, room 32, after taking the afternoon off. She had all these romantic notions of how this and that would be, after being led down the path to marital destruction by a silver-tongued experienced player and wife seducer. Reality had prepared an unpleasant surprise for her. Our house was not very clean because all the children were going to play in it. It was often littered with toys, video games, sports equipment, and everything else you could do during the day. While the children are cleaning up after themselves, keeping the neighboring playhouse clean will take up too much of our family's time. We kept the house clean, but not in immaculate condition. Room 32 at the Seaside Motel, which had long since outlived its prime, was far below even our standards of cleanliness. Juanita immediately began to worry about bed bugs and whether the sheets had been changed after the last guests. She vividly described the scene, but Darren's proximity made her forget about all those fears. As they lay there, Darren spoke. I bet old Jack can't do that to you, right? She didn't know what to say, so she ignored him, focusing on something else. Darren was relentless. Jack doesn't give you pleasure anymore, does he? Jack is fine. Let's not talk about him now. If Jack really suited you, you wouldn't be here with me, would you? No, you'd be at home with him, right? Please don't involve him in this. I'm going to start feeling guilty. You might feel guilty later. Right now you're mine, and I'm giving you something you haven't received in years. After that, he went to the next round and Juanita succumbed. Darren took it as a sign that she was now willing to humiliate her husband. That's right, baby. Juanita heard his words, but absent-mindedly repeating, this is not right. He heard her and continued. Next time we should be in your bed and let Jack watch a real man do his job. I'd have him bring us drinks in between rounds. I would even make him wear a maid costume. If he succeeds, I might even let him join in the next round. Juanita was so excited by his words that she lost all desire and felt sick. When he quickly moved away, she got up and went to the bathroom. Did you like it, baby? He asked dreamily. Everything was fine until you started talking nonsense about Jack. If you mention him in that tone again, I will hurt you so much that Humpty Dumpty's fall will seem like a simple puzzle compared to this. You disappointed me in many ways today. She searched for the right words. Let me be completely clear. You will never touch me again. You will also keep this unfortunate incident to yourself. If you don't, your wife will find out about it, and you will lose a lot more from the divorce than I will. Think about supporting 3 children for the next 10 to 12 years. She will keep the house on Drury Lane, and you will live on Drury Lane. I can't believe I risked my marriage and a happy life for you. She slammed the bathroom door, quickly cleaned herself up, and got dressed. If she needed any more proof of how cheap this place and her romance were, then the screams of the woman in the next room were clearly audible through the walls. She wondered if she and Darren had heard him speak disparagingly of Jack. She went home, took a shower, and spent the rest of the day in tears. When Jack came home, she wrote, he asked why I was so sad. She blamed the sadness on Amber, who left after the upcoming wedding. She was terribly embarrassed to lie to me, but she couldn't let me find out how she betrayed our city and got so little in return. She noted that she got what she deserved from this novel and would like it never to happen again. The thought of how much she could hurt me with her actions was unbearable. She promised to turn over a new leaf and become the best wife for me in every way she could think of. She decided to be more attentive and cook my favorite dishes more often. Even though I'll never know the real reason, she was determined to make it up to me. How amazing. She cheated on me, and I recalled how she had been so good to me, as she had described, during the chaotic months leading up to Amber's wedding. When I complimented her on it, she said she was caught up in the romance of the wedding and wanted me to know how much she loved and appreciated me. The lying woman was just trying to ease her guilt. Well, at least she'd learned her lesson, or had she? I continued reading. As the attentive husband I am, I neatly folded the newspaper, placing it on the breakfast table before going to check on her. Finding her seated at the edge of our bed, clutching a tissue, I couldn't help but probe a bit. So, I gather from your reaction it's the same person. I didn't realize you were so acquainted. How close were you? I inquired, subtly adding to her distress. He was just a colleague, albeit not the most pleasant one. But no one deserves such a fate, she replied, her thoughts drifting to his family's plight. They're the real victims here. According to the article, he had a reputation as a womanizer, and the suspect list is extensive. But his family deserved better than him, I continued, insinuating my own virtues. Perhaps now his wife can find someone truly deserving, like I've been for you and our children all these years. The implication wasn't lost on her, evident by the shiver that ran through her. Since you seem composed, I'll head off to work. Leaning in, I planted a quick kiss on her cheek, noticing her reluctance to meet my gaze. With a newfound spring in my step, I left for work, relishing in the notion of karma at play. As I departed, Juanita observed my buoyant demeanor, resolving to keep a closer watch on me, pondering if I held any knowledge of their brief liaison, if one could even call it that. Once again, Thursday morning had arrived and we had slipped back into our usual routine. I barely registered the occasional sideways glances Juanita shot my way as we lounged in front of the TV, days after last week's incident. A few more leaves had drifted from the trees in our backyard. Juanita remarked, "The weather's supposed to be nice on Saturday, so you should rake up some of those leaves before they pile too high." "I was planning on it," I replied, settling into my chair with the newspaper. "It's already on my agenda for the weekend." "How was bowling last night? You came in quite late and I was too tired to stay up." "I did all right," I said, recounting, "with scores of 225, 178, and 231. We narrowly clinched second place, with a mere 3-pin lead. Sorry for the late return, but it was Jeff's birthday, and we stuck around for a few drinks to celebrate." I opened the newspaper, and at the bottom of the first page, there was an article about another man found unconscious. The headline read, "The Fear of a Serial Killer." I quickly scanned it, noting the similarity to the one that was published last week. Wow, I can't believe this has happened again. But this time, it was in his apartment, and it was much tougher than last time. What do you think about it, dear? "Oh, it's terrible. Did he have a family?" she asked anxiously. "No, it was a single man named Thomas Reardon. He lived near where you work, on Bleecker Street. Did you know him?" She rushed into the bathroom in a panic. I grinned again, maybe a little wider this time, although there was no one nearby to see it. As I continued to delve into her journal, she elaborated on the measures she took to cope after her affair. She acknowledged my obliviousness, suggesting she should withdraw before arousing my suspicions further. As the wedding drew near, her entries were abundant with details. However, after the wedding, they became sparse and mundane, dwindling to just 2 in August. Just as I was losing interest, mentions of another man emerged, recently divorced and showering her with compliments. A familiar pattern to me, though seemingly not to her. Perhaps he was more subtle than Darren. Enter Thomas Reardon into my wife's narrative. This time her conscience seemed less troubled, having escaped unscathed from her previous indiscretion. It was early October when he first appeared in her writings, making her feel young and desirable. He even brought flowers for her desk, prompting her to attribute them to Jack to avert gossip. He was unfazed, asserting she deserved them regardless of who received the credit. Smooth operator indeed. By Halloween, she had arranged a one-time date with him at his apartment. He lived nearby, on Bleecker Street, and they could slip away for a brief meeting. This time, he was counting on a longer relationship, so he gave it his all. His bed was decorated with rose petals, soft music filled the air, and candles flickered in the dimly lit bedroom. He put in more effort than Darren, and she enjoyed it quickly, and they barely made it back to work on time. She reminded him that it was just for once and wrote that it was making love. I looked up from the damn book. She uttered the phrase, making love. They didn't have intimacy like she had with Darren. She was making love to him. I was already in a state of anger and confusion because she gave in to a second lover, but it exceeded all expectations. It turned out that he persistently destroyed what was left of her virtue, and 3 days later, on Friday, they met again. The following Tuesday, they met again, but they lacked the romance and joy of their first meetings. But despite this, she experienced pleasure before returning to work that day. At their 6th meeting, he asked if they could go ahead and try something new. She said no quickly and firmly. The next time, Thomas decided that a little effort would be enough to get what he wanted. The next time he met her during their vacation while she was distracted, he quickly did what he wanted before she realized what was going on. She tried to resist for decency's sake, but quickly gave up. It wasn't as bad as she'd imagined, but it wasn't as pleasant either. When, during their next meeting, he proposed the same thing as the last time, she decided to break up with Thomas. Reflecting on what turned from a short affair into a full-blown romance, she expressed regret over its development, although she cherished the initial romance and euphoria of their early meetings, until he began to resent and ask for something new. Feeling guilty, she admitted that she had thought about making amends to Jack, but was afraid to arouse suspicion by suddenly agreeing after such a long, decisive refusal. She noticed, "This time it will only take a few verbal pleasantries and one of my famous meatloaf dinners to fix everything. I may have gone a little overboard last time. I mean, I've had 2 affairs and he still doesn't notice." LOL. She laughed at how much I loved her and trusted her. It made me want to purify myself. After finishing my breakfast, I rose from the table to check on Juanita. Finding her still by the toilet, I fetched a damp washcloth for her. She accepted it gratefully, wiping her mouth. "Feeling unwell, Juanita? Could it be the flu, or perhaps something you ate last night disagreed with you?" "I think I'll manage, Jack. It's just devastating how he was murdered." "So you knew him then?" "The news mentioned he was a serial womanizer, and there are concerns about a potential pattern emerging. His ex-wife spoke to reporters, suggesting it was only a matter of time before a jealous spouse sought revenge. Seems he had quite a few disgruntled husbands on his tail. Maybe the authorities will find connections between the 2 cases. By the way, you used to work alongside him, right? Any chance you know someone they both had relations with? Perhaps it's worth informing the police." She interrupted, her voice tinged with panic. "I didn't know either of them well enough to know their romantic partners. I wouldn't be of any help to the police." After a moment, she composed herself and added, I couldn't assist in their investigation? All right, but if you could assist them in locating the killer, even with just a small detail, it might help prevent another despicable person from being harmed. Though, come to think of it, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad outcome. Eliminating a few sleazy individuals could send a strong message to the others. Do you catch my drift, darling? That's a horrible thing to suggest, Jack. No one should meet such a fate. Are you seriously defending those worthless, selfish scoundrels? I mean, if I even suspected for a moment that those scumbags had harmed you in any way, well, let's just say they'd have faced much worse than death. I would have made them suffer, made them understand exactly why they deserved to pay, before allowing them to pass on. No, I'm not defending them at all. It just feels excessively brutal, that's all. If you're implying you would have prolonged their suffering, then that's really frightening, Jack. I've never seen this violent side of you before. That's because no one has ever betrayed me like that before, and I sincerely hope you never have to experience the level of betrayal that would provoke that side of me. Anyway, I have to head to work. Are you planning on going in today, or are you taking the day off? I'll be all right soon. I'm feeling much better now. Well, you haven't been sick like this since you were pregnant with Amber. This isn't morning sickness, is it? I teased, or did I? There was no mention of contraception, and you haven't been on the pill since my vasectomy 15 years ago. Oh, wait. To get pregnant, you need to engage in intimacy, and we haven't had an intimate relationship for more than 2 months. Wow. I didn't realize it had been that long until just now. Wasn't it Labor Day weekend? We'll have to rectify that soon, won't we, darling? Her guilt was as clear as glass on her face. She hadn't noticed that she had shut me out for so long, considering everything that was happening. In truth, I had shut her out for the past couple of weeks since I made my discovery. She just hadn't realized it. I have to leave. Hope you start feeling better. Bye. I left without attempting a kiss, supposedly because she was vomiting, but truly because I didn't want to taint my mouth with her unfaithful, deceitful face. I got my revenge, and I was feeling good again. It wasn't until the following Wednesday night, nearly a week later, that Juanita stopped casting suspicious glances my way. Perhaps she had convinced herself that the deaths of the 2 womanizing men, both killed and castrated, were merely coincidental. Perhaps the second murder had been inspired by the first. Thursday morning rolled around, bringing with it our customary breakfast meeting. While Juanita approached it with apprehension after the events of the past 2 Thursdays, I anticipated it eagerly. Upon my arrival, she wasted no time in confronting me. You were late coming home from bowling last night. That's 2, or is it 3 weeks in a row? You're not up to anything you shouldn't be, are you? Me, up to no good? You must be joking. I'm about as interesting as watching paint dry in a snowstorm. I wondered if she'd recognize her own words. No, I had an outstanding series last night that propelled us into first place. I bowled a 235, a 221, and then a near-perfect 297. I was on fire. Joe also had an impressive series, and the rest of the team performed as usual, helping us secure the lead by 10 pins. We stuck around to celebrate a bit. I apologize for not calling you first. Imagine if that final ball had curved differently, you might have seen my name in the paper today for achieving a perfect game. Speaking of which, oh, here's the paper. Despite my explanation, Juanita continued to give me skeptical looks as I perused the paper. I flipped through the pages and came across a frightening image right in the center of the first page. It was a crime scene photo in which a police representative was trying to assure the public that the perpetrator would soon be apprehended. When I got into the details, I exclaimed, turning to Juanita, "This Lovelace has struck another blow." That's what they call him now. They are convinced that it is the same person. Apparently, this time the victim was found in his car on the shore of a lake popular with couples near the marina. I lowered the newspaper, noticing the fear reflected on Juanita's face. His name was Manny Trabajo. She screamed and rushed into our bedroom. I couldn't help but grin. After her second novel ended, she became less remorseful, which led to her making less effort to make amends. She mostly recalled the first meetings and expressed surprise at her lack of self-control, as she assumed it would be a one-time event. Entries in the diary began to appear again from time to time until at the end of March, another young man began to show attention to my loving wife. 10 days later, he convinced her to meet him for lunch in his car in a secluded spot near the marina. They had a quick lunch before they kissed. Although she was not promiscuous in high school, she had 2 first lovers before graduating from high school. This was not her first date in such an environment. By their third meeting, she'd learned to recline the back of the passenger seat for more interesting activities, which they immediately engaged in. She was afraid of being discovered, so she tried to look calm at work after that, and anxiously watched her appearance on the way back. Every time they met, she described every meeting with him in detail. The most memorable one was by accident, when he accidentally stained her blouse with white. Naturally, he apologized sincerely and took out some wet wipes from the glove compartment to wipe them. But the stain remained. During their subsequent meeting, he repeated what happened to the blouse, only now the white substance got into her hair, which he didn't inform her about until she noticed it in the toilet, returning to her office. Eventually, she realized that he was doing it on purpose, and this forced her to end the affair. In her note, she wrote, "I managed to escape again, so I swear to be a better wife. Yes, that's right. LOL. I have the best of both worlds, a caring host, and the joy of having a new lover once or twice a year, which helps to dispel boredom. I'm just disappointed that romantic dates and courtship end so quickly because they really make me feel young and desirable. I wonder how long it will take me to find another lover." I followed her after I finished eating, naturally. It wouldn't make sense to let a perfectly good breakfast go cold. She was regaining control from a bout of crying when I entered. She heard me and glanced up. I could see pure fear in her eyes. Could she really believe that I was responsible for eliminating her lovers and that she might be next? If so, I could only chuckle inwardly at her. Judging by your reaction, I assume you also knew the victim of last night's incident. Damn, that makes 3 out of 3 with you. Why do you seem to know all these philandering jerks well enough to pity them? Why do you—" I pretended as if a light bulb had just flickered on above my head. "Please tell me you weren't involved with these guys." "I can't believe you'd even think such a thing. Are you implying that I had affairs with those losers? What exactly are you insinuating here, Jack?" She changed the subject way too swiftly for it not to have been premeditated. "I'm not accusing you. I just found it quite a coincidence that you were acquainted with all 3 of those scoundrels. I was just teasing you. I know you love and respect me far too much to jeopardize our wonderful years together for a few moments of forbidden pleasure with those cheating jerks. I was merely surprised that you knew all 3 of them well enough to be upset about their demise. It's not about them. It's about how appalling the murders are. Then why didn't you react until after I mentioned his name? You were sitting there perfectly composed until I said Manny Trabajo. That's what pushed you over the edge." She averted her gaze. The tension was building, and I found myself silently pleading with a higher power that this time it would be a complete stranger. But when I realized that his company was doing business with mine and I'd seen him around the office a few times, I just couldn't handle it. It's not like I knew him well. But the fact that it happened to someone familiar, that does make sense. I nodded. Perhaps I should ask you, considering you suspected me of involvement with them, if you were the one who took them out. She lifted her head to meet my gaze. "My dear," I responded, planting a kiss on her forehead. "If I ever suspected you were involved with even one man, let alone 3, you wouldn't be sitting here interrogating me. Anyway, I must be off. Goodbye." With that, I left the room, feeling the metaphorical knife twist a little deeper. I chuckled to myself all the way to work, replaying the scenes in my mind. On Wednesday evening, Juanita did not sleep until my return from bowling, which happened around 11:15. It was a little later than usual, but not as late as in the last few weeks when I came almost at midnight. She couldn't sleep anyway because she was so nervous. You see, in the last 3 Wednesdays, 3 of her former lovers have been sent to another world. Each of them received a blow in the place where they were close to her. To make matters worse, the police suspected that a jealous husband, possibly Juanita's husband, was behind all this. Juanita was studying me closely when I entered the house. I smelled like beer, but there were no marks on my clothes. "Why aren't you sleeping yet, darling? You're usually already fast asleep. Do you feel guilty? Have you spent money on clothes this week?" I asked. "No, I haven't spent anything this week. I just have a little upset stomach, that's all." "How was your bowling night?" she replied. "I'd rather not discuss it," I muttered. "I have an early meeting tomorrow, so I'm going to bed." In less than 10 minutes, she assumed I was peacefully asleep. Yet, she couldn't shake the irony of it all. While she harbored suspicions about my knowledge of her affairs and imagined me secretly eliminating her past lovers on Wednesdays instead of bowling, I remained silent. Why hadn't I confronted her or expressed anger? It seemed as though I morphed into another persona, one aware of her actions yet maintaining normalcy otherwise. It baffled her that I could carry on as if unaware, as if it didn't trouble me. She couldn't betray any hint of her infidelities. She had to remain composed. When she turned away, deciding to sleep, I shifted uncomfortably, muttering something barely audible like, "Damn, damn, damn." She opened her eyes abruptly, realizing that she would not be able to sleep for a while. With my back to her, eyes shut tight, a mischievous grin played on my lips. Thursday morning arrived once more. Juanita appeared weary, as if she hadn't slept a wink, whereas Jack seemed completely refreshed. The foliage had nearly shed from the trees. Taking their seats at the table, she inquired once more, "How was your bowling last night, dear?" "I'd rather not discuss it, but since you insist," he retorted sharply. "I performed poorly and we slipped back to second place. My lowest game was a dismal 187. We held a team meeting to pinpoint areas for improvement, that's all." "I'm sorry to hear that. I know how much bowling means to you. You'll bounce back next week. I'm certain of it." She sat down and he remarked, "You look like you haven't slept at all. Are you feeling all right?" "I mentioned I had some indigestion last night, honey. It could be something something you ate. You should be careful with your diet. If it persists, you might need to consult Doc Honeywell." "I'll keep an eye on it." "All right. Let's see what's in the news this morning." He picked up the newspaper, and she anxiously awaited any mention of another victim of the lady killer, because, damn it, she'd had another affair. Jack remained silent for several moments, tension mounting in the air. When she believed there had been no killings the previous night, he shattered the silence, saying, "Well, it happened again. Another man was found unconscious in his office on his desk. This time his firearm was found resting on his chest, aimed at his mouth. What do you think about that, darling?" I really couldn't say what it might signify. "Why are you even asking me?" "Because I know your company collaborated with his just a few months ago, so I assume you've met him. His name is Richard Mellenham." Juanita recoiled and slowly slumped out of her chair onto the floor. Jack grinned as he observed her collapse. He finished his breakfast as if everything were entirely ordinary. Stepping over her limp body, he reached for the last piece of bacon. His thoughts raced back to another entry in her journal, where she detailed her company's successful bid for the Mellenham account and her role as the project's liaison. She eagerly pondered whether she might encounter her next romantic interest there. It appeared that she would ultimately end up with Richard, the boss's son and vice president of marketing, as her partner. She recounted how she chose him, despite his being the oldest of her lovers at the mature age of 39, a mere 8 years younger than herself, compared to the decades younger age of her last 2 partners. She noted his penchant for flirting, but expressed confidence that they could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. His response was to lock his office door and dramatically clear his desk of papers with a single sweeping motion of his arm. How romantic. It was like a scene from a movie. She saw him multiple times weekly, but could only arrange exclusive meetings once a week, where they could meet without other company employees just before lunch, ensuring the office was available for their use. After their fourth special meeting, she got so tired of removing the white liquid from her face and hair that she informed him that if he did it again, their romance would end. He continued to insist, so she had to put up with it. Otherwise, he would have informed her husband. In response, she threatened to inform his wife, and that was the end of their affair. Thinking about this novel, she remembered their first romantic meeting, which she really liked. She was thinking about continuing a romantic relationship with a series of one-night stands, perhaps one a month. However, she rejected the idea as too risky for their small town, fearing that the rumors would eventually reach her husband. She admitted that despite her temporary infatuations, she ultimately wanted their marriage to be stable in the coming years. Continuing her tirade, she declared that she was a worthy wife to him, justifying her extramarital affairs by his neglect. Thinking about her next lover, she fantasized about someone with a British accent, imagining a scenario reminiscent of Brad Pitt. She couldn't wait to find out who it could be. Juanita gradually regained consciousness on the kitchen floor. As she lifted herself into her chair and noticed the newspaper, her memory of why she was there returned. That made it 4 former lovers. She was completely out of former lovers. Where was Jack? How long had she been unconscious? Did he simply abandon her and head to work? If so, it would mean he had lost all feelings for her and must have been aware of her affairs. At that moment, Jack entered the kitchen with a damp washcloth and offered it to her. "How long was I out?" "Only long enough for me to fetch a wet cloth for you. You've now had 4 encounters with him. It's starting to seem like quite the coincidence, isn't it, darling?" "And that's all it is. A coincidence." "Are you certain you don't know anything that could assist the police in finding the killer?" "I'm sure they'd greatly appreciate it," I teased. "I'm positive I don't know anything. Just leave me alone." "Relax. I was only teasing. If you can't handle a joke, you'll struggle to deal with me during our retirement years. You've got to lighten up a bit. After all, it's not like you'll be spending your golden years with Brad Pitt." I playfully tapped her head before heading off to work, grinning mischievously the whole way there. Juanita had been fatigued from sleep deprivation and on edge throughout the week. The slightest unexpected noise would startle her. Even the furnace switching on startled her once. Jack had been acting perfectly normal, except for the fact that he hadn't initiated intimacy for the past 4 weeks, coincidentally beginning a week before her former partners met their unfortunate ends. As he departed for work on Wednesday, she began pondering it all. Could he be aware of my extramarital affairs? She mused. Knowing him to be a passionate individual from their years together, she reasoned. He wouldn't simply ignore it if he knew. He'd confront me, or I'd return home to find all my belongings strewn across the front lawn. Perhaps he's gathering evidence, suspecting something. But if it's mere suspicion, why would he drop hints that I might be aware of something and suggest going to the authorities, especially if he could be implicated in their deaths? None of this adds up. I just wish I understood what's going through his mind. One thing's certain, I'm tailing him to that blasted bowling alley tonight just to be certain. At that moment, her phone rang, and it was her current partner, Hugo Long. "Hi, beautiful. I can't wait for the evening. Are we still bowling?" "Yes, he's still there, but I'm not sure if meeting tonight is such a good idea. I have a feeling he's hiding something. Maybe we should take a short break." "Don't worry, baby. You're just being paranoid. If it makes you feel better, we'll wait until he goes bowling, and then we'll start having fun ourselves. I'll keep an eye on him, and as soon as he's inside, we'll come back and start our party. You crave my touch as much as I crave yours." "I suppose you're right, Hugo. I had similar thoughts. Her rational thinking was clouded. This was their 5th meeting, which coincidentally began the day he came across her diary, and there was no sign that it had stopped. She thought she should have looked for such well-heeled partners earlier. He usually leaves around 5:45, so be around by 5:30. I can't wait, darling, she added breathlessly. I'll be there, honey, don't worry. As soon as he's gone, I'll stand at the end of your driveway. When you get to the car, we'll follow him unnoticed. He won't recognize my car, so we can follow him closely. This is the plan. I can't wait for you to be where you belong. Me too. See you tonight. As planned, they followed him to the alley where he blithely entered, completely unaware of any plans. They waited a couple of minutes on the opposite side of the street, but when he didn't show up, they hurried back to her house. Hurry up, darling, she whispered. I want it in his bed. He doesn't know anything about us. It's so cool. I always knew it was stupid of him to neglect a beautiful woman like you. You deserve someone who appreciates you, not someone who prefers to play bowling. Passion flared up as soon as they entered the house, and in a few minutes they were on the bed. An hour and a half later, Juanita invited them to put themselves in order. When she got out of the shower, she saw a terrifying sight. Hugo was lying motionless on the bed, and the sheets were covered with red liquid. Some nerd was tying something that looked like a fishing line around the area of Hugo's instrument. He said calmly, I'm saving this for you, Juanita. I know how much you admire it, as you've mentioned many times. It's so valuable that I couldn't bring myself to put it away like the others. Shocked, she fainted. When she came to, she found herself lying on her back in bed, and Hugo was lying on top of her, and his considerable weight, height 6 feet 4 inches, weight 245 pounds, was pressing down on her. Her wrists, like her ankles, were bound to his hands with strips of cloth. She was immobilized and her mouth was taped shut. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier, but you passed out before I could. My name is Herbert, he said in a calm but eerie voice reminiscent of Peter Lorre's. I met your husband many years ago when I was in the hospital. He was visiting a sick friend and I was undergoing treatment, you might say. You see, I've been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, or as it's commonly called, I'm a sociopath. My parents took me to a psychiatrist who hospitalized me. I didn't have much success until one day Jack showed up and showed me how important it is to be a good guy and what advantages it gives. We became close friends and he visited me often with the approval of my psychiatrist. I can honestly say that Jack played a significant role in my rehabilitation, allowing me to eventually reintegrate into society. Until recently, I had no problems with the ADF. After graduation, I found a good job and did well in California. However, my unfaithful wife left me and I lost my job due to the merger. After my savings ran out, I returned home to my parents. It was a difficult time for me, but I handled it as well as any normal person. Exactly 4 weeks ago, I found myself at a bowling alley, listening to live music, when I spotted my friend, Jack, at the bar. He looked utterly devastated, as if his world had just crumbled before him, and in a sense it had. After coaxing him to confide in me, he revealed the shocking tale of discovering your diary, detailing your numerous affairs, with the possibility of a new one brewing. I was appalled. Jack, a genuinely good person, didn't deserve such betrayal. I pledged to avenge him discreetly, ensuring his innocence remained intact, while those who wronged him faced their reckoning. After consoling him, I discreetly extracted more information, including his regular Wednesday night bowling routine and where he stumbled upon your diary. The following day, while you both were occupied, I infiltrated your home, read the diary, and meticulously planned retribution against those who thought they could desecrate a marriage with impunity. For the last 4 weeks, on Wednesday nights while Jack was on the tracks, I punished one of your lovers using an alibi in the form of a crowded bowling alley. Given their indiscriminate nature, I calculated the chances of the authorities pinpointing the culprit, knowing that there would be many suspects and not enough evidence. My lack of empathy, a trait of my sociopathy, has saved me from typical mistakes, ensuring that my actions go unnoticed. Tonight I will commit my last crime. When I leave, I'll turn on your ceiling fan. Pay attention to the cloth tape attached to one of its blades. According to my calculations, it will rotate for about 6 minutes until the string unwinds from the cardboard roll and then pulls the papers from the bedside table to the heater, which will lead to a fire. If the authorities investigate, they won't find any trace of the rope. It will completely burn up, like the cloth binding you to your current partner. They will decide that the two of you, in the rush of your actions, accidentally dropped the papers and suffocated from the smoke, not noticing anything while you were carried away by each other. So, tonight you will meet your end, realizing that your reckless actions have led to the deaths of 5 more fools who deliberately got involved with a married woman, and you yourself are a ruthless adulterer. Your diary reveals the full depth of your meanness. Do you know that? I can only imagine how pleased Jack was with the latest developments. Every week one of your mistresses met a well-deserved fate. Ha ha ha. Maybe I should apologize for the rude humor, but honestly, your opinion of me doesn't matter. I just hope Jack agrees with my decision that you deserve it. After all, he'll be better off without a lying spouse, don't you agree? He rose from his seat and made his way to the bedroom door. It's time for me to say goodbye, he said, as I need to set the upstairs on fire before someone alerts the fire department. I wouldn't want Jack to return home prematurely and accidentally report it before all my evidence is destroyed, along with you. Farewell, you promiscuous woman. With that, he flicked the switch on the wall, activating the fan, and a few moments later she heard the back door shut. She saw the rope coming undone and panicked. She tried to push Hugo away from her but could only move her arms slightly. Trying to call for help, she found that her mouth was closed and it was pointless to scream. As Herbert had predicted, 6 minutes later the fire broke out, filling the room with smoke. On the way home, Jack reflected on how strange it was that as soon as he decided to collect evidence of his wife's infidelity and publicly expose them during the divorce, her lovers suffered a sad fate. Despite his concern for his children, he believed that his wife should be held accountable for her actions and disrespect for him. After punishing each lover, suspicion naturally fell on him, making his wife doubt whether he was behind it and whether she could be the next. Noticing her growing concern, Jack returned home to find that fire trucks were putting out a fire in his house. At first, the police carefully checked Jack, but numerous witnesses provided an alibi, confirmed by surveillance video from the bowling alley. Moreover, the preservation of the male qualities of the victims excluded a direct connection with other crimes. Financial investigations showed that Jack did not have the means to organize such actions, and inquiries about the whereabouts of his closest associates did not yield any results. Jack even voluntarily passed a lie detector test, which was convincing. Overcome by violent emotions, Jack was unable to connect Herbert's return with the possibility that he might turn out to be a notorious misogynist. Their bond was strengthened after Herbert's return, and Jack's becoming a bachelor. 3 decades later, when Herbert was faced with an incurable form of cancer, he confessed to Jack, who just bought him a beer. The cases remain unsolved,